Okay, for our second assignment in continuous learning, we're going to be talking about trade policy and tariffs. So this is a kind of foreign concept to you all. So before we talk about that, we need to really understand what a tariff is. I have an explanation from an economist here. He says, a tariff, simply put, is a tax levied on an imported good. Levied means placed, imported means from another country. So simply, a tariff is a tax on goods that come from other countries. He said tariffs are one of the oldest trade policy instruments, with their use dating back to at least the 18th century. Historically, the main objective of a tariff was to raise revenue. If you look at the definition there, that's money collected by the government. In fact, before ratifying the 16th Amendment in 1913 and formally creating the income tax, the U.S. government raised most of its revenue from tariffs. Even so, the main purpose of a tariff these days tends to be about protecting particular domestic industries from foreign competition, alongside raising revenue. You need to tell me what a tariff is and what two things they're used for. You'll find out that trade policy has been debated since the start of our country, but we're going to be talking about most recent trade policy debates. So if you remember back in the 2016 presidential campaign, then candidate Donald Trump spoke frequently about trade policies. One of his promises was to rip up something called NAFTA. You need to listen to this article, it's linked in the assignment, to read about NAFTA, which stands for North American Free Trade Agreement, and its replacement, the USMCA, also known as the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Listen to the article, try and find out what the USMCA is, what it's replacing, why people support it, why people oppose it, and whether or not you're going to have to make up your mind. Do you think it is something we should support or oppose? That's going to be the end of your first day. Okay, for day 2, we're going to be talking about a past policy case study. So remember that we are studying this in order to compare it with the debate over the USMCA today. We're going to be talking about something called H.R. 379 to provide revenue for the government and to encourage the industries of the United States, focusing on what the goal of American trade policy should be. So go to the website. Oops, wrong space. And go to our case study. It says, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that on and after the passage of this act, unless otherwise specifically provided for in this act, there shall be levied, collected, and paid upon all articles imported from foreign countries and mentioned in the schedules herein contained, the rates of duty which are, by schedules and paragraphs, respectively prescribed, namely, if you want to, you can click on this bill and find out the very specific amounts, the percentages, and the dollar amounts. But what you need to know is basically what House Resolution 379 would do. It's a tariff, and your answer should be House Resolution 379 would create starts with a T, which is a tax on, starts with an I, blank goods. Alright, so you know that we are debating something called the Dingley Tariff, a tax on imported goods. You're going to need to know what has led to that debate. So we're going to talk about the historic context now. Trade policies have been debated throughout our history as a country. The first tariffs were passed by the administration of George Washington in 1789. So you need to know the very start of our country, our very first president's administration created tariffs. President George Washington and Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton supported tariffs as a way to protect the new American, quote, infant industries. Businesses were new in America at the start of our country, just as our country was. They were not as strong as companies in, say, Great Britain. So some people felt like it's the government's job to help them. Over the decades, tariffs have been raised and reduced by new administrations. One constant has been change, and the political debates have been very tense. In the 1830s, the use of tariffs almost led to a civil war. The South Carolina state government tried to say the federal government's tariffs were null and void in South Carolina, meaning that they did not apply. President Andrew Johnson responded by proclaiming if South Carolina's state government went against the federal government, they would be committing treason. This meant that they would send the federal army into South Carolina in order to make them collect the tariff. In 1833, Congress passed an act giving the president the power to use the army to collect those tariffs. South Carolina luckily backed down. We'll skip ahead to 1890. Representative William McKinley from Ohio led the push for higher tariffs. This leads to the highest protective tariffs in American history, with an average of 48%. If you put a tariff of 48% on something, let's say a good was $100 coming into America, you add a 48% tariff to it, that good is now going to cost $148. 6 years later, William McKinley is elected President of the United States. In 1897, he calls a special session of Congress to deliver a message to them asking for the creation of new tariffs. So, you can see that tariffs have been debated since the very start of our country. And has it been contentious? Do people argue of them? If they keep being created and keep getting taken away, people must not agree. Okay, now we're in section 1. We need to find out why some people believe the government should use protective trade policies. We're going to read a speech by Walter Evans. This guy. He said, "This bill is very simple in its objects. They are fully and accurately stated in the title. They are, first, to provide revenue for the government, and second, to encourage the industries of the United States." So first, we're going to collect money for the government. We need to find out what this means. Encourage the industries. I am in favor of increased revenue, but I still more insist upon protection. Revenue is essential, but protection is paramount, meaning important, most important. Revenue will help the government prosper, but protection will relieve the whole people. No man can fail to experience the sincerest distress who goes to any of our cities to see the idle men and the suffering women and children. Our industries must be stimulated and encouraged. The bill will put into forceful activity that doctrine of the Republican Party which demands that there shall be encouragement given to the industries of the people of the United States. Our people are without work. Enforced idleness is the greatest calamity that can come to an industrious population. We impose the tariff duty on foreign article in order to give our home people a chance to make what we need. When a product of foreign growth or manufacture attempts to find a market in the United States, it is required to pay a price for the privilege. This is what we call protecting and stimulating American industries, and what our Democratic friends call taxing them to death. Let's talk about this real quick. If somebody in America is buying a good made in a foreign country, that good is employed a foreign worker. If they're buying something made in America, who is that helping? Think about that. Can you understand what he's trying to say by protecting and stimulating American industries? Okay, let's talk about this cartoon by J.S. Puge. He has one medicine for all ills. We have a doctor here. That's actually President William McKinley. If you remember our historic context, when he worked in the Senate, he passed one of the largest tariffs in history. What's the medicine that he thinks is going to fix all of these people's problems? Our first document was talking about helping workers and families. Does the president seem to think it's just going to help workers? Doesn't appear so. Who else might McKinley think that tariffs will help? Does that sound like something people today might say, that tariffs won't just be good for the workers, but tariffs will be good for fill in the blank? In section 2, we need to find out why some people are opposed to these protective policies. We're going to listen to a speech from Patrick Henry. Sorry, I couldn't find a picture of him. Patrick Henry said, "A high protective tariff is a proposed remedy for the many existing ills. The people must be subjected to a higher tax. for tariff is a tax, to overcome the depression in business and general distress. Instead of putting money into the treasury, tariffs have the effect of keeping out foreign producers, of taking money out of the pockets of the people and putting it into the pockets of the protected industries. Many of the rates fixed in this bill were those suggested by the manufacturers of the East, representing certain protected industries. It is right that these men should shape legislation. Think about this. If people have to pay more for goods because those goods are made in America, how much is it going to lead to them having to pay? More, obviously, right? The farmer, the man who comes in daily contact with the soil and who delves from morning till night, was not consulted as to what protection he wanted. His corn is burned in the West for fuel, and his straw rots in the field for want of a market. And should he seek a foreign market, he will incur the risk of retaliation. Talk about that real quick. If America puts a tariff on goods coming from other countries, is it likely that those countries are going to be putting tariffs on goods coming from America? If a farmer wants to sell his products in another country, but that country has created a tariff, is the farmer going to be able to sell his products? The answer would be no. The truth is, the bill will increase prices of goods and will not raise wages. It will force the consumer to pay the tariff, not into the treasury, but to the manufacturer. At last, the burden falls on the consumer. If we pass a tariff, it's going to lead to you having to pay more. Mr. Chairman, this inequality in taxation, this robbing of the poor under the form of law to build up industries is wrong, and will in time be resented by the patient and long-suffering people. It was never intended by the founders of this government that industries should be protected or that one class should ride booted and spurred over the rest of the people. All men are equal before the law, and all should equally bear the burdens of taxation. If the government helps industries by protecting them and leads the people to have to pay more for the goods that they need, is that fair? The poor man will be the sufferer under this bill. Let's look at this cartoon from Louis Darmile. In the cartoon we have the White House, Congress in the back there. Congress just passed a tariff, and who's this man? Trust. Remember that a trust is a really large business. What is that business getting out of the tariff? Who's the tariff going to help? If the idea in this cartoon is that tariffs are going to be helping the large industries, do you think that's something the common person may oppose? Who do you think the government should be trying to help the most? Is it the common people or is it the companies? Alright, now we need to talk about what choice was made. Scroll down to 2C. Results of the debate. Congress passed House Resolution 379, becomes known as the Dingley Act of 1897, named after Nelson Dingley, the one who introduced it. It lasted for 12 years. It was the longest tariff in U.S. history. It was also the highest tariff in U.S. history. It averaged around 47% for the 12 years. It was replaced by the Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act of 1909. It tried to lower the average level of duties, but not much reform was achieved. So as you can see, while it lasted for a while, it did not continue forever. So we have these people who supported it and the people who opposed it continuously bickering. And as you can see, because we are studying about a trade policy debate today, we haven't come to an agreement on whether or not trade policy should be protective or not. Let's make our comparison. The similarity, in both cases, we're talking about trade policy and tariffs. In the past, this was going to be a tariff that would apply to all countries importing goods into America. The contemporary policy is just a deal between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Alright, so again, because you have less time to work on this without my help, you don't have to complete the bottom, but if you want to, it's worth 100 points, extra credit. Let's think through this real quick. The USMCA, if you remember from the very first start of the assignment, the idea is we're going to protect American workers. Do you think we should protect workers, or should